Today we have arrived. The shackles are off, and finally we can talk about all three parts of Demons today.
This is a roller coaster of a book. You were not kidding when you were like, oh, it's going to start off slow, and then it's going to ramp up, and then it's just going to knock you to the ground.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. The only question is, were there more deaths in part 3, or did we murder more names trying to make this video in the process? I guess we'll find out that tonight. All right, let's talk about the plot. We're going to do our usual spiel of just kind of rehash what happened, make sure we're on the same page. Do a little bit of convo as we go through this, and then we're going to jump into some of our discussion points. So finally, we have the gala, and it's a dumpster fire.
Oh my gosh. Like, you can see this today that this would be the season finale, maybe mid-season finale of a reality TV show where you're just like cringe the whole episode. You're just like, ooh.
Right. Well, even before that, you got Liamshin and Laputin. They're letting in the riffraff, right? And we're talking about, like, oh, the food. And then all of a sudden, this drunk guy gets up to recite this poem that you're just like, oh, dude, get off the stage.
Right.
And then you think you're like, okay, we got past the worst, to your point. And then Karmazinoff gets up there and starts his hour-long speech of mercy that literally even the people in the dang book were like, wrap it up, be off the stage.
Oh, it was a mercy when it ended.
Yeah. Stepon didn't do much better. And then there's the mystery professor too. So a lot of people that are there for the food, for the entertainment. They obviously weren't there for the intellectualism that everybody thought we were standing for. Oh, we're also intellectual. Oh God, these speeches suck. Get them off the stage.
I mean, but it is kind of like real life, right? I mean, if you're thinking of today, you're driving down the street, you always turn towards the accident. It just, as humans, we look for those tragedies for some reason because it helps define our lives. And you look for the dumpster fire, right? Of like, oh, they have it way worse than me. That makes me feel better about my life. And I feel like that's what's happening at the gala here is all of these speeches, they're so terrible, but you can't turn away from them because it just gives you this sense of, well, at least I'm not that guy.
Right. Well, there's the parts that they can't relate on, right? Like at least I'm not an hour-long Karmazinoff speech, and at least I'm not this really bored materialism talk from Stepon. But Stepon did have a really good line here about what unites them, kind of. It says, do you know that mankind can live without the Englishman? It can live without Germany. It can live only too well without the Russian man. It can live without science, without bread, and it only cannot live without beauty, for then there would be nothing at all to do in the world. And I think even regardless of your worldview, that's a line that finding beauty in something, I think, is true in most circumstances. And I think even if you're a nihilist, like even if you're trying to destroy and say life is meaningless, they can still find beauty in things. It's one of the few things that really can unite mankind.
Yeah, I do remember that line from the book. Do you think that, obviously it's written, but if this was real, do you think Stepon kind of made that up on the fly, looking around after all those other speeches going, I need to end on a positive note here, and he kind of ad-libbed that to think this kind of everybody can relate to, that find beauty in something, even if it's 5 terrible speeches.
Dude, I think Stepon had that one in the chamber for a while. He was just waiting to unload that one.
Fair enough.
And meanwhile, it's kind of like that gif, like where that guy's sitting there at the table with the coffee cup, and he's just like, this is fine. Yep, this is going exactly as planned.
Everything's fine, and everything's on fire and burning down around him. Yeah.
And that's just part 1, right? Because up next, we got the ball, right? So we gotta get prepared for this, and it's kind of awful because, the ball was pretty boring. Like for as much as a buildup as it was, there wasn't much happening for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ball is just an excuse in order for the real plot to move forward with the murder.
Well, before the murder, there's this massive firestorm that, you're like, oh, look outside. Isn't that pretty? Oh, my God, the city's on fire.
Yeah, the people are revolting. Oh, my gosh, Attica, or whatever that would be in Russian.
Well, and then von Lemke, even has, his wife arrested. That was kind of a shocker, but like you get a sense for the pandemonium of the time where people are just like, what the heck is happening?
And it happens on a dime too, right? Because then that's what I meant like at the beginning of the video was not that the book is slow. I mean, it does feel slow at times, but it just is this tonal shift that is obviously intentional because you feel not safe or comfortable, but again, deep into the book here, beginning of part 3, you're not sure where it's going. And then next thing you know, the town is on fire. You have these boring speeches and then boom, people are starting to be killed. And you're just like, what is going on? And that's really, I think, what a lot of Russian people felt during this time of it was so chaotic. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what the future held for themselves and their country and what it meant to be Russian or what it was going to be meant to be Russian.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's even symbolism here too, of how Von Lemke was knocked out during the scuffle, almost like to like never have his power again. From if he's representing the government, right? And then you have the city as you know it, the heritage all being burnt away, having to be rebuilt anew. There's a lot of symbolism in the revolution that had yet to happen in a sense too.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely. It's beautifully written, and this is definitely the clincher for the book as a whole.
Yeah. So as the dust settles, news spreads of the murder of the Olivia Atkins, as you were just mentioning, and their maid. Stabbed to death, partially burned down, house on the edge of town. Very, very sudden for how that happened. We're going to get into like kind of the deaths there. But we find out that Liza Elizabeth, she moved out to shack up with Steph Rogen a little bit earlier. And we find the two of them kind of cuddling up with each other. She has these, she laments, she's a ruined woman is what she says in society's eyes as she's getting ready to kind of leave this empty husk. When our boy Pyotr, good old snake-tongued Pyotr, walks into the room, right? And that's when he starts kind of just going off about how, I had nothing to do with the murders, but you should have seen Fedka. He saw this cash. He was going after the Olivia Atkins. And, of course, Lizaveta, being the compassionate, caring person that she is, she rushes out to kind of see what's going on. And poor Mavriki, he's outside, like almost like with the boombox waiting for her. I felt so bad for this couple at this point.
Isn't that always so kind of true in Dostoevsky of how it has all of these main core things, and maybe the economics of it is always a core issue, but it's just that saying is follow the money. It always seems to come back to money in some regard. And I know that we're going to talk about the government and nihilism and philosophy and religion and all that good stuff. And that's here. But it just always seems that money is lingering right there on the edge, just saying, I'm important too.
Yeah, almost like, well, they say that money becomes almost kind of a currency for, well, okay, that was a really bad example.
That was a good pun.
What I meant to say was that with Dostoevsky novels, like money is elevated to a social status. It afforded you certain things that other people can't attain. And it's not like that's unique to Dostoevsky, but it's something that is consistently represented, is that there are things that are unobtainable without money, right? Steph Rogen, he's one of those guys that he can get whatever he wants. He's one of the nobles. His mom was one of the, the richest people in town with 200 serfs. Like literally could either afford to knock off the Olivia Atkins if he wanted to, right? Like even throwing money at Fedka earlier, or sit by and do absolutely nothing, knowing that they're about to be murdered. And you're going to be fine. Like, no one's going to come after you because of all that money. And that's what Steph Rogen happens, especially when he just hooked up with Lizaveta and she goes running out to check out what's going on with Olivia Atkins, like almost like a shrine murdered in the middle of this half burned down house. And then the crowd goes nuts and rips her apart. Like things are going crazy where you really get to see the social milieu is off the rocker when it comes to what the status is of nihilism and the depravity of morals just out the window as people are just being murdered and these riots and this craziness of the fires.
I was shocked at all of the murders, especially some of the key characters. I was wondering, is there going to be anybody left? Is that going to be a point of the book of when you are a demon or whether you aren't a demon or recognize yourself as a demon, it doesn't matter. Society's going to tear you down and you're going to be killed. It is the amount of death and carnage at the end here is astonishing. It really is.
Well, and it's very subtle, but you do have a lot of Dostoevsky redemption, right? When we talk about Flannery O'Connor, right, she's got a very specific view of what it means to receive grace and be redeemed. Same thing with Dostoevsky, right? The way that Fedka almost has like this reawakening as he runs off and is murdered, the way that Lizaveta shows compassion. I mean, we'll get into it, I guess, but let's jump into the posse, Pyotr, because we do got to get through this plot to get to some of these juicy discussion points I know we're aching to talk about here. But the posse, right? We need to round up Shattoff, but Shattoff is busy finding out that he's about to be a papa bear from someone else's kid, possibly Nikolai Steph Rogen. I wasn't 100% clear.
Oh.
That's the hint that I got. But he's about to be this dad, and he's gonna do whatever it takes. Give me the best housewife or midwife for my son, and this is gonna be great. And then okay, I forgot to tell you guys where that I buried that printing press, and then I'm out, right? Like, this is cool, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh, have you not been seeing what's happening in the town, Shattoff? Like, don't go.
Yeah, do you think the naivety there is intentional, that sometimes with money and status, you just kind of lose touch with the reality? And we talk about it later, but I feel like that's definitely something that maybe is kind of being hinted at here.
You mean, like, is Shattoff less in touch with reality because he's poor, so therefore he's like frivolously giving it away I think in the eyes of the rich, for saving a life, for saving the baby, right? Like, for him, he'd give everything for that baby, but for the rich,
right,
they're like, how much is it going to cost? Like, is that along those lines?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I think Shattoff he's not worried about, I don't want to say the word materialism, but he's not worried about earthly setbacks like that, because he's one of the few people that does care about the next generation, right? We talked about Vivara and Stepon just totally neglecting their kids. And meanwhile, Shattoff will do whatever it takes to make sure that his wife, ex-wife, separated wife, and his kid, who's not even his biologically, are taken care of. And I think that Dostoevsky puts that at a higher light than having some stacks of that cash.
And I think that we can get into the discussion of that in a minute here, of what does that represent for Mother Russia.
Yeah. All right, so Shattoff gets there, and bada boom, bada bing, the posse pops out, murder Shattoff, execute him, brutally. And they start to lose it too. Like one of them runs off, one of them's like freaking out, and Pyotr's like holding the gun, like, hey guys, I got a gun. You're gonna need to listen to me. They tie Shattoff up in a rock in a really awkward, poorly thought out plan of how to execute him. March, 200 steps to dump him into this lake. I don't know who thought of this idea. Pyotr. But Pyotr's like, all right, guys, let's split up. I'll go talk to Krilloff and we'll continue on with the suicide plan, right? Because he's going to write this letter that's going to basically put all the heat onto him. He's going to commit suicide. We're all going to be happy, right? So he heads over there, and boy, Krilloff seems to have kind of cold feet, not per se, but more like, you don't tell me what to do. Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, you're really strong in your convictions there.
Well, and there was even a question of, was he going to do it at one point? But, you do hear the gun go off. And if he didn't, I'm pretty sure Pyotr's gun would have gone off to take him out, because Pyotr gets what Pyotr wants. So I guess elsewhere we kind of jump over to Stepon, who's going on his existential journey of, what am I going to do now that I'm not Vivara's like pigeon, I guess. And ends up with some peasants, Sophia, who is very religious, starts reading the Bible, and he continues his existential journey towards Christ, essentially, right? He decides to choose religion.
Yeah, what does that mean? Hint, hint. Come on.
Yeah, you always got that in a Dostoevsky novel, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right, so let's jump back to poor Marie. Oh, this was heartbreaking. She's got this newborn baby. Her hormones are going wild, right? She can't find her husband, right? So she's gonna be crazy. Walks in on Krilloff. You know what I mean? Like how, oh, and then she's like running around in the cold, and then her and the baby too. Like, Dostoevsky, you were brutal to your characters. Like that line that you got to kill your darlings. I think all of his characters must have been his darlings because he's taken them all out.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Eli Roth movie of this portion of the book. It's heartbreaking. It's kind of I mean, it's enjoyable, but it is a struggle to read when you're kind of picturing all these horrific things happening to, quote, the good people of the book.
So the bad guys, the Fivesome, the Fivesome, they're going through their guilt trip, right? Like they're just being bothered by it, and eventually they start to confess. They're arrested and such. And then we kind of have like this time skip of 3 months later, where Varvara returns home and Daria has received a letter from Nikolai, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. Let's go visit him because he's in full hermit mode again." Shocking. And when they find over there, when they find Nikolai, he's hanged himself, right? So kind of a interesting end to the novel there.
For part 3 to be so strong, it felt, and I dare say it, a little bit lackluster, but that was to be expected. It is Dostoevsky, and I kind of thought that was how it was going to go. And I'm okay with that, having that open-endedness to where what is next is very apropos, I feel like.
Well, I think maybe some of that apprehensiveness might even be just from like confusion about the characters, you know what I mean? So first of all, you got to congratulate yourself for having gotten this far. That beginning, that kills a lot of people off on reading this. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So, small pat on your back for having finished this. But let's talk about some of those complexities, right? The Pyotr, right? I can't tell you, reading from different forums and posts and just reviews where people are like, I like this book, I'd recommend this book. I always see this line where they're like, I didn't get Pyotr, right? Like what was he trying to do? What was the point of this revolution? He's very enigmatic. And it's worth pointing out that this book, right, or Dostoevsky in general, I think this is his most complex book psychologically. And when you've got people like Freud, when you've got people like Einstein, right, you got Jung, who's never admitted to reading him, but man, is his psychology in this book. You've got some of the greatest minds in history that are wrestling with this book, like Camus, that if you yourself walk away from this being like, I kind of wonder about that character, you're not in bad company, because it has challenged some of the greatest minds of all time to kind of contemplate what these characters mean.
I think that was kind of the point, though, and that just goes to show how great a novel this is. But also the point of Pyotr, I think, is to confuse you, because the Russian people, they themselves are confused of their identity and what do they want out of Russia? What is going to be their purpose? What is their government? What are they going to look like moving forward? They're very confused on their religious beliefs. They're very confused on the hierarchy system of their country. I think that Pyotr encapsulates a lot of that perfectly. And if you take him as a representation, you're supposed to be confused, and that's okay. I don't think that he is a puzzle to be unlocked and understood.
That chaos, that change that's happening in society, right?
Good word.
Pyotr is always in whatever we were and whatever we're going to be. Pyotr's right in the middle. He's always an agent of that transition of whatever we were versus what we're going to be. Right? We have people who are struggling to stay relevant in terms of like, Yulia von Lembke, how she got manipulated into this whole thing. And even her husband, who's kind of like a symbol of the government, the way that the government might be shifting in terms of what it is. Pyotr's always there, right? And part of his sword, the way that he challenges Russia, is the Fivesome, right? And we talked earlier about Nietzsche, who had that interesting idea of killing someone to basically make everyone follow him, like this fear, right? But it was also that promise of being a part of something bigger that we've talked about, right? Like the idea of being in the movement. Like there's other Fivesomes out there, right? Like you promised there's other Fivesomes. Like people like to be swept up into change and be a part of that change, because then they're also kind of remembered in a sense as part of the catalyst for what made us the people that we are today.
I like how that this is seen as that mob mentality, because mob mentalities are easy to manipulate and then get your own personal goals. I think the confusing part is, what are those personal goals? What are they striving to work towards? And having these little tiny pockets of a resistance, and smartly, I think, keeping them separated allows you to manipulate them even further, because they want to be seen as the best or the most useful or helpful or impact the biggest change, because we all want to leave our mark, whether it's positive or negative, on this world. And I think that the group of five are able to see that if they do X, Y, and Z, then they can accomplish maybe not necessarily their goals, but somebody's goals.
Exactly, right? And how many times did you see the word lackey, which had a very specific use, right? But you see it in all of Dostoevsky's writings, that idea of using other people's words that aren't yours, words that you don't understand, just to become a part of that movement or someone else. There's actually a brilliant quote here from Shattoff where it says, "For little fanatics like Urkel simply cannot understand service to an idea otherwise than by merging it with the very person who, in their understanding, expresses this idea." Right? So when we're starting to talk about these people who are pushing for liberalism, pushing for nihilism, kind of becoming these things, they're not actually their ideas. They're almost kind of getting swept up sometimes in these concepts. And that's a broad stroke, but I think that's Dostoevsky's positioning.
I would see this as today, if we were putting it in technological terms, these are people that hear something and pass it off as their own. So they stitch a TikTok and they make it that these are my talking points, even though they don't understand what they're truly saying.
I can see that. And what I would add to that is how do we look at Pyotr's role in this, right? Because is it really just everybody came to this conclusion, and there's lots of that, but there's also people who are instigating, people who are, like we talked about, in that border of when old becomes new, right? And when it comes to Pyotr's role, you got to almost take into consideration the role of the trickster, right? Something that's as old as tales going back to the Greek era, to fables, of someone who came along and told the truth, or someone who came along and influenced you to do things you wouldn't normally do. A very common one by today's standards would be Loki from like the Marvel universe, right? Like the mischief guy that tempted you with things that you wanted, right? Something that you may not normally do. But inside, like that deepest dark part that is hidden away, you actually want. And that's the trickster's job, is to pull that out, to pull out the darkest impulses of humanity and to get people to change and to take action where they normally wouldn't.
And I think that's the other big takeaway from this whole novel, is that leads us into Dostoevsky's struggle with Russia changing from a very Christian nation into something else. And of course, we have, the knowledge of what happens to Russia, but he doesn't. And that's where we get, the idea of that prophetic knowledge of this book, that they are moving towards something different and maybe, quote, losing their Christianity in a sense, their morality in his eyes, I think.
Right. Well, and the trickster doesn't have to necessarily be the devil. Like it's an agent of chaos and an agent of change. But to your point, Dostoevsky being so heavily rooted in, these Christian values, who's the trickster of Christianity? And that's the devil. And he's not just there for change, he's there for introducing sin, exactly to your point.
To which then people become more easily manipulated if they're sinning, because if you sin once, then what's a second or a third? And that allows Pyotr to, achieve more of his goals, i.e. Russia and the mass mobs are able to be easily manipulated into new goals against the established, hierarchy.
Is it from a position of sin, or is sin the enactment after you've made up your mind, right? Like the sinning is already past the point of the decision of change, right? That's when you are enacting change. That's when you're burning, or from an active nihilism standpoint, which was sweeping through Russia, you're destroying values to prove that they don't hold meaning and such. There's something even before that that, let me read Pyotr's stated goals here directly. It says, to the question of why so many murders, scandals, and abominations had been perpetrated, he replied with burning haste that it was all for, quote, the systematic shaking of the foundations for the systematic corrupting of society and all principles, in order to dishearten everyone and make a hash of everything, and society being thus loosened, ailing and limp, cynical and unbelieving, but with an indefinite yearning for some guiding idea and for self-preservation, to take it suddenly into their hands, raising the banner of rebellion, and supported by the whole network of Fivesomes, which would have been active all the while, recruiting and searching for practically all the means and all the weak spots that could be seized upon. So to me, Pyotr's even a step before, I guess, kind of like that idea of sin, that idea of let's break the foundations of Christianity, let's change the structure of society. He is honing in on the depravity, the hopelessness, the lack of standing for something to fill somebody up with something. And when you have a lot of compliance, so if you've read like, Anna Karenina and stuff like that, you get the idea of you couldn't just go against what society does, because then you're shunned, you're outcast, you're no longer allowed into social events. There was a high level of compliance in Russian society, which means when there's a high level of compliance, fast forward to World War II or to Stalin's reign, stuff that hasn't happened yet, that has happened in the past for hundreds of years. You have so much compliance in a society, if you start perpetrating very negative ideas, sinful ideas exactly in the point of Christianity, that's when you can start creating real damage from a rebellion of destroying what is existing to build what is new.
Oh, that's great. I looked at this the same way, of that Pyotr is making a chink in the armor, that it is allowing him to use his words as a weapon, because that's all he has. And I think that is beautiful that he's able to do this. Again, he's not evil per se. He's just doing what he thinks should make for a better country, for a better, maybe a little bit selfish him as a result. But it doesn't feel like it's a place of, evil, which is unusual for kind of the bad guy, right?
Well, I'll say he sure ain't good.
No, definitely not good. But I mean, he quote could be seen as the bad guy, but
he's the trickster. He's the agent of change. He's not the one directly doing it, though he's got the gun, right? He's going to persuade you to do it, but he didn't do it once. Well, okay, Shattoff, right? Rest in peace. Okay, but for the most part, he was enacting the will of the people a lot of the times. That doesn't mean he's not complicit, but he wasn't the direct change a lot of times.
I mean, he could be seen as complicit because he's the one doing the manipulating, but I guess he's seeing himself as the hero.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And that goes back to that idea of playing that role of the trickster, right, and causing change. To that point, how do you just systematically shake the foundations, right? Like, is there something you can do out there that just instantly can cause everybody's mind to change? And I think the answer to that has to be no, right? Like, there's not a lot of things that you can do that causes the exact amount of change in someone that you want. You can do something that a lot of people don't like or are annoyed with, but to cause change is really hard.
I would agree and disagree with that. I think that causing a change in an individual is very easy. I think causing a change that is a quick break is easy. I think what Pyotr is trying to do, and Dostoevsky is trying to teach us, is that change on a mass scale is not easy and is not fast, that it is a slow, gradual process. Even just how the novel was a slow, gradual process, but it is like an avalanche. It's slow to begin, but once it gets rolling, it's bam, hits you just like part 3, and then you have this spontaneous change, just like we will see happen in the late 19th century of Russia.
There's this quote from Kierkegaard from the present age. It says, "The public is not a people. It is not a generation. It is not simultaneity. It is not a community. It is not a society. It is not an association. It's not those particular men over there, because they exist. because they are concrete and real. However, no single individual who belongs to the public has any real commitment. Sometimes during the day he belongs to the public, namely in those times in which he is nothing. In those times that he is a particular person, he does not belong to the public. Consisting of such individuals who are individuals are nothing, the public becomes a huge something, a nothing, an abstract desert and emptiness, which is everything and nothing. And I think, so this is what I'm confused about when you said you disagree. You're going to have to clarify for me, because here's what Pyotr does. He doesn't just attack the general public, right? We have these subplots of the Shpulgan men who are upset about their labor contracts and about how much the owners are making and robbing of their efforts, right? So he gets something that they specifically care about because he's targeting a specific group. When we go to the religious sphere, right, and we have the robbing of the churches and the stealing of the icons, right, stuff that is meant to be, well, it's really important to Orthodox Christianity. Let's just say that, right? He has all these little subplots that are causing unrest within specific groups. Because to that earlier point, you can't cause massive change instantly to an entire public overnight, right? To your avalanche point. You are settling unrest in all these different areas. And while Pyotr's at the root of it for this novel, for the purpose of Dostoevsky's point, right? Imagine all this unrest happening in your country in terms of riots, in terms of just labor disputes and such. And you have the bad barrel that we are discussing from part 2, and that's how we start to have these massive changes that kind of happen. That's how the trickster gets in to cause these revolutions.
I think that's, yes, I think I agree with you, and maybe I explained my point poorly. Of think of more like a spider web, and the Fivesomes are their own little individual pieces, and that it is all coming together and connected and having one giant momentous movement as the pieces finally are connected.
Mm-hmm. So let's say they break everything, right? And remember, we wanted Steph Rogen to be the leader, the symbol of this change. And we've read at Tikhon's at this point. We know his super secret, dirty past where he is. You're questioning whether he's remorseful. I don't think he's remorseful, but I think he isn't able to establish the new order that he thought he was going to, right? On a very small scale, he was doing his version of Unrest in the At Tikhon's chapter in terms of the women that he was messing around with and what he did with Matryoshka. But he didn't get the power or that master morality atmosphere from like what Nietzsche would write about creating new in terms of having other people follow what your system is, as opposed to Pyotr, who I think is very similar to Steph Rogen. They're both nihilistic. They're both, I don't want to say psychopaths, but they both have this self-loathing, this destructive nature within them. And he does make the change into society the way that he wants. He is the Ubermensch in some regards.
Yeah, I guess he's just so complex, and that's what makes him such a great character, is what is he going to do with himself? Is religion going to be his saving grace? Towards the end of the novel, it feels like it is. That's what's going to ultimately save him. And I guess I took it as that's what Dostoevsky's saying is if you're going to be saved, if Russia's going to be saved, then it's going to have to be through religion. If we lose that, then maybe we lose the identity of ourselves.
Oh, that's totally Dostoevsky's answers. We've read enough of him. We know where he's going, right? You knew as soon as Shattoff was going through that birth where he's taking care of the next generation again, what all the characters in this novel have failed to do is to figure out, what's going to happen next. Shattoff's the one that sacrifices every earthly thing for his child because of what? Because of compassion, because of love. Like, I don't know what okay, maybe I do know. Maybe is the opposite of manipulation, perhaps somewhere. So if you're being manipulated, you're not aware that's happening, but you're doing something that you don't intend. Is in some universe the opposite of manipulation the word innocence. And is that what Shattoff kind of represents in a sense?
But does it matter? I mean, from good or evil, it's still manipulation, right? So does intent matter here?
Well, okay, maybe I'm misremembering exactly when it happens, but Shattoff, if you recall, I think he starts to pray a little bit during the birth. And if I recall correctly, Irina even notices. She sees it and it inspires her, right? So from Dostoevsky's point of view, if he thinks nihilism can be contagious, if you have nothing to stand for, it can be destructive, so can compassion, so can innocence and the idea of love. Particularly if we go to some of his other novels, love is something that is the action. It's the doing. And if there's an opposite of destroying, it's love and creation for Dostoevsky, if you ask me.
And they're always in balance. Is that kind of my takeaway, I think, if I feel correctly about this?
Well, we don't want to spoil the other books, because I have a very specific book of his that I think does a better job of diving into this and the Übermensch. We could say Crime and Punishment deals with those themes well, right? What's a good example in this novel? So if we take the Fivesomes, they are possibly the closest to being irredeemable outside of the Trickster, outside of Pyotr, right? They're the ones that are causing this unrest, willingly trying to do that, trying to have these ridiculous meetings, like where they're putting up their hand. Did you put up your hand? No, I put up my hand. That was hilarious.
No, you put up your hand.
But do you
what's that mob mentality again?
Do you recall that Fedka kind of had like a little bit of awakening before he left? We had Liamshin. Well, even before the murder happened, one of the elves, I don't know, there's too many complex names with elves. One of the elves freaked out and left. Right? He's like, I can't do this anymore. This is not a part of my program, right? I gotta go because this doesn't fit into what I think is right. The others go through it, and the other elf, again, these names, they're hard for me. I think it's Laputin. He starts having a lot of problems. He's starting to freak out. He's got to get the slap to kind of get back into order almost in a sense. And, after that's done, his punishment is the guilt that comes upon him for the murder of their friend Shattoff. And it's not until he comes clean where Dostoevsky specifically puts the words in the book where he says that he tells the truth and feels instantly relieved. It's getting rid of the guilt. It's getting rid of the dishonesty, and it's that compassion and entering into the humility state that Dostoevsky thinks that's what is the counterbalance to the destructive state.
I feel like that it's choices that are being given, like a lot of the characters in the book, they're all be given the choice of do you want to be a part of this revolution? Yes, I do. I want to be part of something grander, or I don't want to be a part of this. That's what it really feels like it comes down to, is it's your choice. And if you make that choice of admitting your faults and your wrongs, then you're going to have a better, happier life. And we see that towards the end that Stepon is trying to do maybe the same thing, of make that better choice to make amends for his past sins and move forward with happiness, I guess, is minimal as it may be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to say on one hand, what they're trying to do, the revolution, let's say I think that's the right thing to do. That's hard because you have to throw off all of the collectivism of society, all the weakness from a Dostoevsky or from a Nietzsche perspective. You got to throw that off to set your own moral standards as from a will to power perspective. And to me, I think that's hard. It's weird the way that we are tuned as a society, that a lot, not everyone, like don't get me wrong, but a lot of times to do something wrong and then to say, and to truly mean you're sorry, you'll find a lot more people will accept it. That truly being sorry, and again, not everyone, not every situation, and it depends on what happens. But there's something about, and I think this would be Nietzsche's critique, that there is community and cooperation that we've learned helps societies move forward. That's why we moved from like these small single producing farms to people specializing in activities and producing in, smaller functions that allows other people to work on functions such as having a dedicated military if you have enough people that are farming, right? This idea of allowing someone back in is something that is generally more advantageous from that perspective of producing the bigger communities and allowing people to focus on smaller tasks almost.
When we look at communities, I think of this book in the manipulation of a collective consciousness, that you have to put little seeds of doubt or remorse or whatever you want to call it into each of individual for all of it to come together and blossom and come to fruition. And I think that because as a society, we do work together, to your point of what I always was kind of taught of that idea of a social contract, that this is way society will behave if we all do X, Y, Z. And this novel is showing how easily the social contract can be manipulated to people that are the have-nots, or people that are, seen as lesser than or inferior, or in envy of those of the higher status. And in Russia, we saw that hierarchy, and we saw how money, to your point earlier, was used as this, lording over people. And I just feel like the whole book has kind of wrapped it up together of this is what can happen to a society when you aren't moving towards a common goal, when you aren't working together. And to Dostoevsky's point, it kind of comes to fruition. It is very, prophetic that this is kind of what happens to Russia over the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Did you just casually drop some Thomas Hobbes Leviathan information on me?
Oh, yeah, I did.
I didn't know you read that. Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that Hobbes here would have, in a way kind of agreed with Dostoevsky's fear of how society can be so easily manipulated and how the social contract can be broken so quickly when people's fears are preyed upon.
That's interesting. Yeah, the idea of like you gave up certain rights to join a group, right? And that's true of any country, right? Like if you live in a country and you become a citizen of that country, and well, even just being in that country, you are bound by the laws. You are bound by certain things, right? So when that changes, that's a really interesting point to have brought that up. Let's move on because there's still so much to talk about, and the night is young here, friend. we've got to talk about death because I think we skip over too much when we do our Dostoevsky talks about what does this death mean? What's the purpose of it? Because, I think it's easy for the materialism view, right? Like I'm going to die. My body's going to turn into atoms. We're going to replenish the earth. Animals are going to eat me as I replenish the grass. Like that's a fairly easy way to look at this, but that's not how everybody views death, right? And when you look at the Russian population in terms of the consciousness of that, you have a lot of Christian ideas of what does salvation mean, what does grace mean, and what does redemption mean. Because I think, I don't think this is a stretch, a lot of these characters are looking for some form of reassurance or redemption. Is that a fair
reassurance?
Okay.
Yeah, perfect word.
Okay, so when we look at Stapon, you brought him up a second ago, and we didn't even really dive into him, but he obviously was, I think, looking for some type of redemption. Do you think that maybe his speech was the culmination of this movement of intellectualism and what we think is great ideas, and we'll I don't want to say worship ideas because that kind of implies like this really weird modern narrative that's happening, but he's starting to realize that the intellectualism isn't working for him, and he actually starts moving towards the icons, towards Christ. He has Sophia read the Luke parable, which was also the epigraph to this novel and such, where Jesus drove out the demons, legion, from the person into the pigs. But the most important part is that final line where the man was healed, meaning there was a chance for salvation, for redemption, in a sense. And I think that's what Stapon was going for, right? He's just like, I don't like what I stand for anymore. I don't think these intellectual ideas are working for our society. Look at the way the people are behaving. And I think he's looking for that collectivism. He's looking for that idea. And I think like Christianity is what brings that comfort and possibility of redemption to him.
You buy a red car, you see a red car. He did these bad things, so all he's seeing is the bad things in people, and he needs reassurances of himself and everybody else moving forward. And because his intellect has failed him, he needs to find an alternative. He needs to find something to reassure him, as you said. And it could have been anything, I think. And that's what I think is why he's such a great character, is because a lot of us can probably relate to that as we move through our lives, questioning our own existence, questioning our own belief systems, having faith, losing faith, regaining faith. That's something that a lot of people have as you go through your 20s, 30s, and you become middle age, or whatever age he may be, as you're navigating a very complex society, not only your own internal problems and issues, but also those external, as well as you are with the other peoples of your collective country and consciousness and everything together.
If he's the guy that sees nothing but the negative, is, when we're talking about these balances and different views, is the opposite Shattoff? Like, did you get an idea that he was the one that sees the positive, and he's kind of like the lamb to me, the way that he he's innocently walking into the slaughter.
I mean, that's kind of needed, right? You always need somebody to be the sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, there's
that's pretty typical.
Well, there's people that want to be the sacrifice. The martyr, very common icon for Christianity. You have perhaps even... I'm trying to throw out... Do I throw out Lizaveta, who clearly... She's got compassion. I think she did care about the Olivia Atkins. And so she goes out there and, she gets ripped apart by the amoral society, nihilistic society that's just going through a craze of rebellion, right? Or maybe not so much them, but maybe Olivia Atkins, right? Like the captain almost has this redemption that he's looking for. And Maria, the fool that never really did anything wrong specifically, and they were sacrificed to be a symbol for the revolution. The idea that this is meaningless. If you believe in nihilism, this is meaningless. And by the death of the symbol of the martyr, the death of the person who has done nothing wrong, that it can create and spark the change that we intend.
Oof. Yeah, that's the crux of the whole novel. I think that's what it comes down to is change. What's going to make that change? Who's going to make that change? And ultimately, why and how are they going to make that change?
Mm-hmm. So if you're just going to drop Hobbes on me, let me drop some Camus on you. Have you ever read Albert Camus?
No, I have not.
Okay. So Krilloff, like the character, totally not Dostoevsky mindset, right? Like so unique to this novel. Like this guy that's just like, I'm going to kill myself. Why would you do that? My will. like he's kind of out there. Maybe before I jump into some of the philosophy behind Krilloff, what's your take on this guy? Because I've had this one in the chamber since the first part, but I knew this would be the part to take it out.
So is Krilloff representing free will? He's the guy that you're allowed to make your own choices. He's the representation that there is no predestination, that you can make a choice to turn towards religion for your salvation.
Oh, no. For sure not. Because that means that God is real. And
okay.
that's the whole premise, is that if God is dead, and I'm not quoting Nietzsche there, but if God is dead, then I am God, is what he's saying, right? So Camus, if you didn't know, it's actually kind of funny. He's got this myth of Sisyphus, and you know what the myth of Sisyphus is from a Greek perspective, right?
Oh yeah. The guy that pushes the rock up the hill, falls back down, has to do that for eternity, up, down, up, down, up, down, right?
Left, right, BA, select, start, yes.
Yes.
So when it comes to absurdism, imagine that it's kind of like nihilism, where we accept life as meaningless, There's no point here. Nature doesn't have some magical design, okay? We're just atoms, right? But the difference is nihilism is almost a rejection of meaning, but it doesn't accept the fact that we search for meaning. Almost like pattern machines. Human beings create meaning wherever we go. We create stories. Now, what's a story versus what's a reality? That is a totally different discussion. It's the acceptance that we try to create meaning in a universe where there is none. That's absurdism, right? That these two can't match. Why do human beings obsess over having a purpose to their life? And purpose does give value, right? Like, people will put up with a lot of crap and a lot of pain if there's a reason for it. And they'll push through. Like I've got stories about my mother pushing through some of the hardest things in our lives. Because why? Because for family. Because that's her purpose. And what's the point of that when it's just like, well, there is no design. There is no magical reward in the absurdist view. So that's absurdism at a high level. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, sir.
So the next fun part.
Oh, that was not the fun part?
No.
I got all cheery and rosy
Here we
inside.
go. You ready for this one? All right. So what's the solution to this? Well, this is where Krilloff really inspired Camus down the line, which is why I think this novel is just so brilliant. So he thought that the idea of self-deletion or suicide, there's two forms. There's physical version, right? Which is the version that when you hear that word, you automatically think of someone that decides to willingly end their physical body's life. And that's one solution, right? That logically makes sense that if, why put up with the suffering of life? You could just do this. But Camus almost, while it makes logical sense, rejects it, right? Because by ending it, that doesn't actually posit that there's a possibility for change. It doesn't prove that there is no purpose in life. It's just a rejection of it. And also it denies the possibility to change suffering. I don't mean to jump into the changed old to new conversation again, but it denies the opportunity to go from suffering to joy. And joy is a generally accepted good thing. So while that's like one of the solutions, it's not really a great one because it doesn't directly answer the question of what is with the point of life when there is no design to the world.
So I do have a question. What does this have to do with the rock hanging over his head? Explain that to me.
Pretend the rock is God.
Oh, okay.
And pretend it hanging over you is the fear of God, right?
Oh,
because let's say you take your own life, the self-deletion side of things. Then the other part of that question, because remember there's two parts. One, the death would be quick. If we are just atoms, that's it. It's over. It's quick. Like it would just end the suffering, but it doesn't do anything, right? Like it's meaningless too. But if there's the afterlife, well, that's when all of your past decisions and all of the designs of
they
did
matter.
You follow, it didn't matter, right? The eternal suffering side of Christianity, if you will.
Okay, yeah, I'm following along. Yeah, I get you.
I mean, I guarantee you there's whole papers written on this. But think of it this way. With some people who are atheists and believe that we are just atoms, and they're looking at this idea of Christianity of like, okay, so all I got to do is follow this rule book that is very strict where, at any given point I can have this eternal suffering and I've got a celestial super cop that can see absolutely everything that I do and everything that I'm thinking. Yeah, this sounds like a setup. That's not something I want to buy into.
I mean, yeah. I guess from a certain perspective, it's easy to manipulate or fool somebody, as we've talked about.
So let's keep going down this route because now we got to talk about the second form. So we're rejecting the first one. We don't think that's a really good answer because it doesn't actually answer the question. It's just not playing the game, if you will. So the second one is what he would call philosophical suicide, or this solution is the idea where you said the word free will earlier. It's in that space, but you're giving up your decisions to kind of enact a certain life that might not be your own, like maybe a little bit of the Lackey-ish discussion that is happening in this novel. But it's almost like this mental suicide where you're taking out choice, you're taking out that opportunity and just following blindly along with a rule book for life.
I mean, isn't that kind of what we do when we enter into society? Sometimes we do follow these precepts that we may not necessarily agree with, but we have to kind of fit in. I mean, that does happen.
I think on some levels, right? Like you have to give up something from your look at you with your social contract. You just want to bring that up again, don't you?
No.
Well, okay, here's a very timely and relevant to this novel. Do you remember the speech when they're talking about that? Oh, why do I got to bring up a word I can't say? That Shigailovism, that character that was talking about the utopia where there are no slaves, we're all equal. Sounds a lot like communism.
Ooh, that sounds nice. Give me more of that.
Right.
Tell me more.
Right, but it's that same idea of giving up everything for the purpose of equality, giving up everything for the purpose of community, this utopian society. It's just another form of the philosophical suicide of intellectually giving up everything just to believe that we're the same, to follow this root path. I'm probably not doing the best description of it, but the idea, if we could, have that conversation, is the numbing of accepting the absurdism of life. It's like you're lying to yourself and saying there's a purpose and following this rule book when you know that there is no design in life. Like that's the philosophical suicide version of absurdism. Like it's lying to yourself that the universe isn't just random and you're making up a purpose and actually trying to believe and follow it.
I love lying to myself. Do I believe myself? Oh, how do you believe a lie to yourself?
Well, okay. All right. If you're going to open it, we're going to start talking about Steph Rogen, this final scene here, because Steph Rogen, does he truly understand himself, right? When we look at, like a lot of psychology, like Carl Jung, I always say Jung, because that's the way my professor said it. Sorry, I wasn't a major. I had one professor that probably messed up my pronunciation of his name for life. But, he had that breakdown of there's your ego, your consciousness of what you're aware of. And even in this consciousness, you have the persona layer of what you present to society, right? And maybe what you're presenting is because it's socially acceptable. It's the agreement to enter into society, the way society acts, or the way my religion expects me to ask, or the way I need to participate in this sporting event and the way that I have to support people. That's all part of the consciousness part, which we talk about. But we neglect, because how do you talk about it? The unconscious layer, right? Like what's happening back here, and how many times are things that are unacceptable to society, unacceptable to our family, to our loved ones, right? Like let's say you and I are hanging out and we see, a beautiful girl walk by and we make some comment about it. Are we going to make that same comment in front of our wives? No, we repress that probably, right? High level example. But
if you don't want to sleep on the couch, yes.
Yeah, but now imagine being one of those people that has like those violent tendencies, or those tendencies that could cause harm, like Steph Rogen. He perhaps represses some things, but other things he acknowledges. And it's that repression where we put it in the shadow space, is what Carl Jung would call it. And it's this repressed part of both our personal, like collective knowledge, and like what did he call it? The collective shadow, like the idea that there's an experience relevant to all of humanity that's just hidden in there, that's not even part of a personal experience. And if we don't acknowledge those, it's those demons, the tricksters in us that they don't even always have to be evil, but they are repressed, that cause us to do things where you're like, why did I do that? Like how many times have you done something stupid? You're like, why didn't I just call my wife, or why didn't I just admit to doing this wrong thing? And we did an action, not out of our conscious brain, but because our shadows came up and took control of our body because they're being repressed. And is that because those are our deepest, darkest things that we don't want to admit? And if we don't learn how to express them in a healthy way, what Carl Jung would call individuation, is that what causes this mass psychosis? The whole point of this novel, these demons, is this what, when we go through and have these dark repressed tendencies and continue to say that we have to act a certain way and don't find healthy ways to express them, that's how our unconscious takes control and lashes out and allows us to do irrational things, such as what happened a lot during World War II and during some of these totalitarian, I'm not saying totalitarian regimes force this, but we have seen some great crimes against humanity from people who are normally good apples. They get into the bad barrel and do bad things when they're repressing a lot of these desires and not able to express them in a healthy way.
And it kind of comes back to our point of society, right? That we are only doing these because society has told us or not told us of what is right or wrong or what is acceptable or unacceptable. And we create these filters on ourselves of, I won't say that, I won't do that, because society says this is acceptable or not acceptable. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Steph Rogen, he throws away those filters for a while, and he sees the trouble that it gets himself in, and he feels guilty about these things because he realizes that sometimes society knows best, and that you're going to have those filters in place for a reason, because your id or your ego is going to appeal to those baser instincts that might be wrong, and that somebody else may have a better solution for you and then allow you to live a better, healthier life. And I guess that can you take those demons and grapple with them in a healthy manner and live a life with or without religion? Obviously, we kind of know where Dostoevsky stands on this, but I think that Steph Rogen is wrestling with that of how am I going to implement that into my life, and the demons that I have, the demons that I may have, and the demons that maybe I want or don't want to keep.
And then don't you see how that ties in perfectly to what we were just talking about with the guilt of being able to say, how can I live with this? You know, even looking back to the Fivesomes about how they felt better the instant that they were able to confess. What were those hidden demons inside of them that they've been repressing and going along with just to be a part of, there's other Fivesomes and stuff like that. They failed to be the Ubermensch. They failed to be those men that were able to create those values. And their unconscious, their evil desires, their impulses came up, and it's not something that they could be whole by just ignoring. It's that individuation process where you have to accept and do that inward search that they were not doing. And I think that's just the brilliance of this. Dostoevsky wrote this in 71, before Freud, before Carl Jung, before Albert Camus, before Nietzsche to an extent too. Like it's crazy how much he took from the human conscious that wasn't even like, I'll say science, whether you take it to the psychology route, the evolutionary route, like there's a lot of different ways to break that down. Before any of that. And he saw that in people. That's the true prophetic nature of Dostoevsky, not the fact that he knew a revolution was coming, but that he knew what drove human beings to do the evils that they do.
And the evils that they don't.
The last question that we have to ask at the end of each of these videos, right? And again, thank you for all that have stayed with us this far. Again, it might come off as begging, but we did put several months of effort into this. If you want to share our video, if you want to check out our Patreon to see if that's something that you want to consider to support us, we'd greatly appreciate it. But our content is always 100% free. We're not gonna pay gate our content. But I have to end our conversation here, my friend, with what are the demons in this book?
I think I've come to the realization that the demons are in all of us, and the demons are the struggles of what to do and what not to do. And ultimately, why do you make those choices? Is it something that is an external force that is affecting your decisions, or is it something that's an internal force guiding those decisions? And I think that's something that all of us will grapple with our entire lives. And there is no right or wrong answer. And I don't think you'll ever have a true answer because you're always going to be a different you at different stages in your life. And I think that's why this is probably your favorite of his.
I don't know, man.
And,
I read Brothers Karamazov. Like, I got like that 20 years of that festering inside. I've got what?
yeah.
I started this 3 months ago now. I've got 3 months of experience with this. I'm on a honeymoon. Give me some time to let this simmer. But absolutely, this novel is just it's his best character work yet. I'm gonna say it. I think psychologically, these are the deepest characters he's created.
Yeah, and character evolution, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Except for maybe Crime and Punishment. Ugh. So many to choose from. Check out our playlist.
yeah. Well, we'll be doing Notes from the Underground if you're interested in that coming. Obviously, until that happens later on this year, we've got the Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, Crime and Punishment playlist down below. Obviously, we appreciate you spending some time with us. We appreciate all of our friends that have read along with us. We'll put links to their channels down below. We did some great live streams to have discussions with them. This is just one of those books that I think we have to return to and probably do like a philosophy of, or maybe focus on a specific character because there's just so much to explore and uncover with a Dostoevsky novel.
Peace.
We really appreciate it. My name has been Una. Peace.